Listen, welcome to the talk. Thanks for coming. Delighted to be here and delighted that crows have sparked such interest. This is a turnout, definitely. I once gave a talk to two old deers and a cat, and by the end of it, one of the old deers and the cat was asleep. So hopefully most of the audience will be still awake at the end of this. So so crows are fascinating, and we're going to get into that. This all stemmed from, I moved back from England over a decade ago, and I was an ornithologist, studied supposedly a bird expert, and a family friend asked about the local rookery in Portlaoise, and I could literally tell him nothing about it or about the rooks, and I was quite embarrassed, and that's what triggered me to start reading up and looking into the rookery and stuff. And when I start reading it, I compiled such an amount of interesting information, and I found them so fascinating that an opportunity came up to give a talk about anything I wanted. And I said, do you know what, I'll throw a few slides together about crows. So it stemmed from there, and I've done it all over the place. And Mike asked me years back, I don't know how many years ago, it must be 5 or 6. I think the second Wild Mind, I did it down in Mike's Cafe. So this is more or less the same talk. So I don't know if any of you were there originally, but I hope you enjoy this. And this is the secret life of crows. So the crow family, they're the largest of the passerines. So the passerines are songbirds. So they are considered songbirds, believe it or not, even though they just go around crowing all the time. It's not really what you'd call a nice song like a robin or a blackbird, but they are perching songbirds. There's 40 true species of the black crows, like the Corvid genus. But in the word crow comes from the Anglo-Saxon word craw, which is basically an anglicisation or whatever of their call. And there's 130 species of Corvidae, so the entire family, which includes the magpies, the jays, and the nutcrackers as well. So we have examples of all those species in the country, except for nutcrackers. You have to go a bit further east into Europe before you see a nutcracker, and it includes all those species. So the biggest one is this guy here is the laser work. Over there, the furthest guy, the big lad with the white patch in his head, that's an Ethiopian tick-billed raven, and he's about the same size as the northern raven, which is the guys we get here. So they're the largest, actually, species of songbird in the world. So crow family, a few facts. Crows will eat anything except avocados. So they're not quite woke in that sense. So the thing there is that there's a molecule called persin in avocados. It's poisonous to all birds. But I gave this talk in the Botanic Gardens years ago, and when I said this, a hand shot up in the crowd, and she went, "That's a lie." And she said she had a pet jackdaw, and that all she fed it was avocados, and he was fine. So I don't know. So it's supposedly a fact, but this lady was doing her best to poison this jackdaw, but it didn't seem to be working out too well for her. Scavenging only equates to a very small part of their diet. So I think we all think crows and magpies, all they do is eat bodies and things on the side of the road and all that sort of stuff. But that's that's only a very small part of most of the species' diet. There's only a few places in the world that have no native crows. That includes New Zealand, the southern part of South America, way up in the sort of... you get ravens at 80 degrees north, so into the Arctic Circle, but you don't get them down in the Antarctic. So, they're mostly gregarious, or they're mostly basically ubiquitous across the world. And they've the best spatial memory of any animals, and we'll talk about their brains and their intelligence and all that in a minute. But the Clark's nutcracker can put away nearly 80,000 beech seeds, basically, and find the majority sometimes under snow, and so they can literally contain a map of where they left most of those seeds. So it's quite an amazing feat for I suppose, an animal. So the crow family, what sort of makes them crows is that they're physically similar, dark plumage, large, handsome birds. They're gregarious, which means they're social, and there's a caveat there as well. So there's a caveat to most things, but within the breeding season, they do become territorial and protect an area around their nest and will have territories. But outside of the breeding season, they're quite social. And you'll see that with the rooks and even ravens and magpies as well. But we'll talk a bit more about the different species in a few minutes. They're monogamous, which means they pair for life. Again, there's caveats. And as we talk about the different species, we'll talk about some of the sort of extramarital stuff they get up to when we get to it. They are all single brooded, so they've one go at nesting a year, 4 or 5 eggs, and if that doesn't work out, they skip a year and they'll wait till next year. They're not like blue tits or swallows that might have 3 or 4 goes in the season. And they choose their mate quite deliberately, and I put there that some people everything chooses their mate, but not if you're a female deer. You get round up by the sort of toughest guy in the in the woods and you become part of his harem. So, but certainly crows very, very selective in who they mate with and who they pair for life with. They're quite adaptable, which owes to their success across the globe. Ubiquitous again, they're everywhere, whether it's the McDonald's car park or up the field or down the bog. You'll get crows all over the place and all over the world. And they're very, very intelligent, and I'll talk a lot about that. So some collective nouns, just if you haven't heard them, a murder of crows, of course, is the famous one, and it doesn't really shed a very positive light on them, but it's one of those things. It's there. A congress of crows makes them sound a lot more intelligent, a lot more regal and important, so that's quite kind to them. A hover of crows, I don't really understand, but it does have a sinister connotation there, I think, of these sort of flock of crows hovering over you, sort of ready to pick your eyes out or whatever they're doing. Parliament of crows, again, is quite kind to them, and then an unkindness of ravens, again, is a bit of a mean one, and you'll see those things in the old literature and stuff, and they've all got, I suppose, those terms are quite loaded, and some of the people who are writing this stuff had reasons to do that, but we'll get into that as well. So there's a lot of negative, so public perception can be quite different. Obviously, everyone here, again, kind of preaching to the converted in a lot of ways. And by the way, if you're here for tips about how to get rid of crows, you can leave now, because there's no slides on that, okay? There's always one hand up at the end going, oh, how do I get rid of jackdaws over the chimney? I'm like, you're asking the wrong guy. And so they're all, they've a black colouring, and of course over history anything that was dark or nocturnal often got sort of, I suppose, made a pariah, or there was negative connotations sort of surrounding them all the time. They eat carrion, which is dead stuff, be it humans or a dead sort of cat on the road or whatever. They will certainly scavenge on that. They won't waste a meal. So as humans, we don't really understand that, and we kind of go, ugh, and we sort of go, don't like crows, they're dirty, they carry disease or whatever. There's a big association with witchcraft, always is, and often you'll see stories and pictures of witches depicted with crows hanging around and all that sort of stuff. They travel in raucous gangs, and they do flocks, and they are noisy, and we do, because they're quite big compared to the other garden birds, we think they're sort of bullies. But I mean, again, it's similar. And then, of course, Alfred Hitchcock made the movie Birds, which turned an entire the globe against gulls and crows completely. And now a lot of people will never have seen that, but it's worth getting it on YouTube, some of the clips. It is really sinister, it is really frightening, and it's about gangs of crows and gulls that take over this seaside town in America, and it's terrifying. And I guess some people believed it or believe they're capable of it, but it's of course not the case. There's a clip from it there now, so you can see the crows pecking out the children's eyes. Lovely. So it's not great. They're seen as bullies and loud and raucous, which is just, I don't know, we'll see, make up your own mind. Again, they're ubiquitous, so anything that's very common or around a lot, people just don't care for. It's just very normal, like, oh, that's the crows, you don't really stop to look at them or take any interest. And they're considered an agricultural pest, and can be in big numbers in certain situations. But there are some positive things. There does seem to be an understanding that they are intelligent, and that their cognitive ability is quite strong, and we'll talk about that. They're interesting and accessible, and I said you'll see them in the McDonald's car park, and you will, and they're very accessible in that if you choose to watch them and you choose to give them a bit of time, they are there, and they're very accessible in that sense. In popular culture, I mean, at least in recent years, Game of Thrones certainly, the whole three-eyed raven, all-seeing, all-knowing, all that sort of stuff, definitely portrayed them in a bit more sort of intelligent, more powerful sort of way than maybe Alfred Hitchcock did. So it maybe did them some favours. I mean, after the Harry Potter movies, there was a boom in white owls being kept as pets and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know if there was equal sort of people going out getting crows as pets after Game of Thrones, or ravens, but certainly it did them no harm, I believe. And then farmer's friend, they eat an awful lot of leather jackets, which are those little grubs, which are the larvae of the cranefly, the daddy longlegs. So they're an agricultural pest. They eat the sort of roots of plants before they get going, and then before you know it, the crop has died off. So crows, especially rooks, love those. So they're actually, in many settings, a farmer's friend in many respects. So we've 7 species of corvids. So that's your crows, your magpies, and your jays in Ireland. So can we name them in the audience? All 7? Any hands? No participation? Hooded crow, yeah, that's 1. Chuff, yeah, excellent. Rook, yeah, 3. Magpie? Jay. Raven, yeah. Jackdaw, excellent, yeah, and Raven was said, and hooded crow, excellent. Well done. I don't have to give the talk. There seems to be plenty of knowledge here. I won't get too stuck in on the facts of all of them, but on every slide we have a map of their distribution, a photo of the species, and some information along the side about their sort of averages and bits and pieces. But here's the jay. The Irish name nails it. They often do. The Irish names often just really summarise something quite well. And the name is Screech O Quilla, which is the screamer of the wood. And if you've heard jays, they really do give it a good old screech. I remember the first ones I heard, I thought something was being bludgeoned to death like a baby pig, or maybe it was a bird of prey, sort of like celebrating, sort of like its kill or something like that. But it's quite raucous and quite terrifying in a sort of dense woodland. I don't know if I can play it there, actually. It should play... Jim, can you play it from there? Can you find that? Is there should be a little audio cue there somewhere. Oh no, maybe not. Don't worry about it. But so you can see often they're associated with oak woodlands. They love acorns. They will cache them for the winter and then go back and find them for the leaner months. But the interesting thing about jays is they're credited with perpetuating their own habitat. So they almost manage, they farm for themselves. They put the acorns in the ground, they cache them for the winter, but they'll often forget 10 or 12% of them, and they will perpetuate little acorn trees which will grow into big oaks, and then they'll have more food for the years going on. So they actually credit jays with almost the spread of the original oak woodlands of Ireland before we became farmers and hatched them all down for the British galleons, as we like to say. But I don't know how much truth there, but I like that story, so we'll go with it for now. So the magpie, snagbractor, great. I find them a beautiful, handsome bird. I know we kind of we've a culture in Ireland. We hate magpies and we hate nettles and dandelions and pissy beds. We don't like them either. So and we just have to get over that. It's really weird, but they're a beautiful bird. They are seen as introduced, but they're not. They got here on their own steam, and it was just after Cromwell left Ireland that this flock of magpies was seen coming in off the sea, and it's now they're considered introduced. And it was kind of like a parting gift from Cromwell. He gave us these feckin' birds that, you know, they're awful yokes, and now we have them, but they are native. Anything that gets here on its own steam technically is, so it's they are. But I find them beautiful. If you see them in good light, when they've just molted and they're in good body condition and their feathers are grey, they've got this petrol blue on the back. They're just absolutely stunning. Really smart. They do like hunt in pairs and will take the eggs and chicks of small birds, but a lot of species do that, and we just blame them. I mean, they're just feeding themselves. That is their ecology. So, but we don't tend to like it because it jars with our own, I suppose, values as humans. So you can see they're absolutely everywhere, quite ubiquitous. All over the place. Star teat are now in the north of Scotland. They don't really like to be like the mountainous areas are too cold. So, and they're often seen around urban areas. So there's a heat map now, so you can actually almost identify the big urban masses in the UK and even in Ireland, where they like to be around towns and villages. They like to be around humans. There's a bit of an association there. Very interesting in that they do this thing called let's say extra pair paternity, where the female will allow a male from outside, not her mate, to give her the slip, and that's to make sure the genetics, because they're kind of semi-colonial, that they live in the same area all their lives, and if they were all interbreeding in that small population, that the genetics would get quite weak over time. So the females will mix with other males occasionally to sort of strengthen that genetic mix. And because of this, the males know this, so they do this thing called pair guarding. And you often see, it's one for sorrow, two for joy. Early in the spring, you'll see two magpies all the time. And that's where he's following her everywhere she goes. She can't go over the wall, she can't go up the tree, because he's afraid Ned down the road is going to, So that's what's going on there. So if you see that, then around this time of year, they're already on the nest. So she'll be incubating and he'll be over and back feeding her. So you often see one, you're going, shit, one for sorrow, have to wave at Mr. Magpie, all that sort of stuff. And then later on in the year, you see more. That's when the family groups are together after the breeding season and stuff like that. So that's kind of what's going on there. And of course, there's association with magpies and shiny things. And the famous Father Ted episode of the nest made of completely of Father Jack's glasses, which is absolutely hilarious. But there has been loads of studies by the BTO, which Sam referenced, really important and established scientific ornithological association. And there's loads of PhDs on whether magpies like shiny things. And there's 2 PhDs that have proven that they're actually a little bit afraid of shiny things, which is astounding. So, but there's obviously no smoke without fire. So it's really strange. Wherever that sort of old wives' tale comes from, there has to be some truth to it. But in terms of scientific proof, they can't find it. But I did hear a story on the radio just yesterday on one of the Mooney Goes Wild. There was a documentary about magpies, and Ian and Launa told a story about a nest, a magpie nest in Dublin, made completely of aluminium hangers. I don't know if she was joking. Niall, you're probably familiar with the story. But it's crazy. So wherever, first of all, it could get 50 hangers from, and then they entangle them and had this nest. So they're obviously not afraid of shiny things. We're all familiar with those hangers. So quite interesting to know what the hell is going on there, but it seems to be a thing. The jackdaw, lovely, sweet little thing, blue-eyed boys, really sort of inquisitive. They're the guys that nest in chimneys and in kind of colonies in castle ruins and in cottages and all that sort of stuff. Again, really ubiquitous. But they're talking about extramarital affairs. Early on in life, when the males dictate this, if they want to rank up, if a female, a more dominant female, an older female, becomes available through death of her mate, he will quite happily divorce his own wife, the younger one, and marry up the way, if you want, up the pecking order. So they do that. They're quite cunning. So yeah, that's jackdaws. They're funny yolks, and you see them often riding around on sheep, picking the ticks off sheep and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, they're clever little things. Chough, then, you'll be familiar with down here. I'm up in Laois, so I've never seen them. And they're quite there. I mean, you can see the map there. They're completely coastal. They've disappeared off the east coast in Ireland, but we still have them thankfully along the west and southwest coast. So quite familiar. Actually, Will O'Connor, the ecologist, put up a photo only of a chough yesterday, just seen outside Phoenix. So they're definitely around. They make this quite electronic call. Actually, Jim, you might. Oh well, you're not there. It's okay. See if you can play it. I can see the symbol there at the bottom of the box. See if it'll play. Familiar with that call? Anyone walks along the coast or the cliffs? Absolutely beautiful. Sam, if he's still here, if there's any questions about chough afterwards, we'll send them straight to Sam. Sam does an awful lot of chough ringing. He'd know a lot more than me. There is a thing in Europe called alpine chough, and some of our choughs will go a little bit inland and up the sort of mountains a little bit. So that does occur, but to be quite close to the coast still. And they're funny as well. So they've definitely got a pecking order as well. And in the winter they will roost along the ledges, the coastal cliff ledges. And what happens is the older birds make the younger birds, the first year birds or whatever, the less dominant ones, they put them on the outside of the ledge, and what happens then is that it protects the other ones from the weather and insulates them from the worst of the weather. But also when the peregrine comes hunting first thing in the morning, they're the first ones to go. So quite cunning that they're pushed out literally, and that is a social, a societal thing. It's just you got to accept that you're young, you're less dominant, and that's how it works. So yeah, that's chough. Rooks I'm going to talk about a lot. Rooks are the guys you see in the fields, big, heavy grey bills, and I'm going to talk about their social and society quite a bit, so we won't dwell on those. But yeah, they're and you see lots of rookeries in the trees around the village and stuff. So that's their really important species. We'll talk about those. And then the hooded crow, the grey crow, the scald crow, you might call them down here. There's loads of names for them. Their Latin name is Corvus cornix, but there's another species called the carrion crow, which you might have heard of. And a number of years ago, they split them. They used to treat them as the same species, a subspecies of the same species, if you like. Or they used to treat them as the same species, but then they split them. And this happens in the scientific world quite a lot. They'll lump species together and then they'll split them and they'll lump them and split them. But at the minute, those two species are split. But the only difference between them is this colouring. So you see this map. The map is crazy. So, see, you can basically a distinct line there on the map. So below those red dots, on the eastern half of Scotland, down into the England and into Wales, you get the black morph, this corony, which is the carrion crow. And there's the females, they do hybridize a little bit, but the females in North Scotland and all of Ireland select the grey ones. They like to date the guys with the grey flush on the chest, and they sort of reject the black guys, the fully black ones. And then the ones in England and North Scotland, they prefer the black ones. And then there's a little bit of hybridization, but not as much as you might think. So it's quite interesting. So our guys are the grey crows there. And years ago I was living in England, and I went into the co-op, which is the like Spar or whatever there, and on the way in on the road there was a hooded crow, this guy with the grey, and we're down in this part of England. We're down here in Suffolk where they don't get those, but I didn't realise, being sort of wet behind the ears. Went into co-op, got me shopping, and when I came out there was a full-on twitch. And a twitch is when like bird watchers all descend on a place to see a rare bird. And my boss was there, and he's like, "You cop shy." He says, "Why didn't you did you see that bird there when you went into the shop?" And I says, "Yeah." I said, "What's the big deal?" He says, "Like, we don't get them here, you Irish idiot." Like, he's like, so like half of the village was here was spotting this bird, and I just didn't have a clue that it was rare in England. But sure, there you go, I know now. So the raven, absolutely, Fiach Dove, the black hunter. I mean, amazing species. Jim, you might play the call. I mean, the Rook is called her. It's just stunning. They're absolutely amazing, and they keep huge territories. And Vernon, which was one of the sort of Victorian naturalists, if you like, he said to describe, they never spoke in specifics, those guys. They always said vast numbers of birds and all this, and the flock went over for hours. They'd never give a guess of numbers or anything like that. So his description of how big a raven territory was, he says there was never more than one pair in an estate. So if you think of a British, an English estate, it could be a couple of hundred hectares, a couple of thousand hectares. So they defend huge big territories. But the really, really bizarre thing about ravens is they pair for life, but they can do this thing called rapid remating. So if one of the mates is lost from the nest, within hours they can replace the female or the male from, no one knows how, because technically there should be no other ravens within miles of them. So where are they recruiting that other bird from, or what's the backup plan, or how is that done? So it's really, really bizarre, but that's what they do, and that's survival. So what will happen is if the new female comes along and there's eggs or chicks, she'll actually eject them and she'll get busy with the male, and they'll form. She won't want to rear the last female's chicks. So ravens, pretty cool things. They're considered one of the smartest animals, and we'll get to that. Ravens can imitate human speech, and birds and other animals that can, that's often an indication of intelligence generally. They're featured in many myths. They demonstrate rapid remating, I just told you that. Very playful. They do weird things with ants. That's from an English or an American slide. Basically, they get drunk on the folic acid emitted by ants, and they literally get drunk and be falling around the place, and then get hangovers afterwards and regret it all. So you can see videos of that on YouTube if you're interested in searching that out. They're highly adaptable. They show empathy. So that was something that the scientific world is still struggling to accept, that because we think as humans that we're so much more above the sort of rest of the biota and the world, that how could anything sort of have the same understanding and intelligence and cognition as us. So but definitely they have empathy and show empathy to other ravens and other things. They roam around in teenage gangs, so that's true. So as Sam mentioned, the cuckoos and other birds won't breed for a number of years until they're mature enough. So a raven might be 3 or even 4. So before then they're going around in these teenage flocks. It's safer to do so. It's easier to find food, although you have to save it. But also you're vulnerable from attack from other older established ravens as well. So they stick together for a while. And it's thought in these teenage gangs is where you might get your backup plan for the rapid remating. You kind of have a side salad, if you like, that if things go wrong on the nest, that you can get this chick or dude to replace. They weigh about the same as a human brain, which is on average 3 pounds if you're brainy, less if you're not. And their nests are known as eyries, which is nice and pretty well known. And ravens are awesome. That's a fact I added. they used to be known as wolf birds and still are in parts of the Pacific Northwest and all that sort of stuff. And it's believed that they would form relationships with individual wolves, would form relationships with individual ravens. In the event that something like a caribou or whatever would be injured or go down in cover, and the wolves wouldn't be able to relocate it, and the raven would draw their attention because they would have the bird's eye view of where this big elk was or whatever, and they would be able to alert the wolf pack to where it was, because they know then they would get the share of the spoils once the wolves had stripped the carcass. And that's certainly the case. There's some indication that it's same with polar bears, with seals and bits like that. And also there is suggestions, especially in the first people, if you like, the Native Americans would, and in other sort of populations as well. There's some sort of suggestion that the first hunter-gatherers would have had the same relationships with certain ravens, in that they might get a couple of spears through a deer, it might scarper off into the woodland, and the humans would struggle to find it, and that a raven would alert the humans to where it was, and they could then chop up what they needed and leave the carcass for the ravens, and it's a win-win situation. So quite an interesting, collaboration there, if you like. So crows and humans. Crows have flourished in a human-dominated world, but why? So we'll talk about mythology, the evolution of species, landscape altered by us, and changing opinions. So ravens, so myth, legend, religion, beliefs, it's all, I've listed them all because there's a lot of overlap. Call it what you want, but for example, one myth is that ravens could make, if a blind person was kind to a raven, they could restore their sight. And that's believed to come from, because during medieval times we'd have these huge battles. There'd be hundreds, if not thousands, of dead and maimed warriors on the battlefield, and the ravens and the other crows would alight on the field and literally pick the eyes out, because they wouldn't have the hardware to rip open sort of skin, and they'd all have armour on. So the most exposed piece would be the eyes. So the first thing they would pick out is the eyes. So they kind of put two and two together. They're like, well, if they're eating hundreds of eyes, they must be able to restore eyesight. So that's where that one came from. And of course, there's loads of connotation with witchcraft and black magic and all that sort of stuff. And I'll tell you where that all comes from in a second. Again, then, like loads and loads in religious beliefs and all that sort of stuff. This sculpture up here is a sculpture from the Hadida people, which are one of the tribes, the original sort of first people from the sort of Pacific Northwest. There's loads of tribes up there, and they have a lot of stories called the Raven Tales. I don't know if you ever came across them. They're quite humorous stories, and the Raven is often the protagonist. He can be good, but he's a bit of a trickster, up to all sorts of. But this sculpture depicts the origin story of the Hadida people, and they believe that the raven was scouring around the estuary or whatever along the coast, and the first men were struggling to get out of this oyster shell, and they were kind of afraid to leave the shell, the protection of the shell. So he encouraged them to sort of come out into the earth and see what was going on. So he was sort of seen as the creator, if you like, or the instigator of all that. And then he got sick after a few days of watching men sort of going around being a bit useless, a bit stupid, not really knowing what to do. So he went out and he found a shell full of women, and then he let those out. And then he was quite amused by how the men were behaving around the women, but it all worked out in the end, and here we are. So it's all good. And again, like in the Bible, of course, a very important text for many years, and still to this day, Noah himself had a raven on the boat. And there's a great nautical history of ravens, that a raven would be brought on board and it would be set off then when they think they're near land. And if the raven flew off in a certain direction and didn't come back, they would sail the ship in that direction because it was seen that he found land. If the raven set off and then came back, saying that you're still miles and miles and miles from land, so it wouldn't work. So that's still a sort of nautical thing. And the other thing, there was other corvid on the, well, all of the corvids, I suppose, technically were on the, but there's a story that the magpies were on on Noah's Ark, but they wouldn't come inside. They used to sort of heckle Noah out from the top, from the roof. So that's also seen as a sort of where one of the negative connotations of magpies came, because they've got that quite raucous call, you know, and they've got that kind of rattly call. They basically just tormented Noah the entire time. He was trying to do the right thing for everyone, but meanwhile these magpies just you eat Noah, like, what are you doing? Get us out of here. And Of course, Cain and Abel, the story goes, it's in both the Quran and the Bible, of course, slightly different versions. But the raven showed Cain or Abel, I get mixed up, where to bury his body, how to sort of get rid of the evidence that he just murdered his brother. So kind of Christianity and religion sort of, it didn't suit them that people, especially pagan tradition, sort of worshipped these demigods or whatever. So in a lot of those early religious texts, there's a lot of sort of stuff saying, you know, bad things about sort of the animals that we worshipped at the time. And as Church of England came along as well, and we were still quite pagan in Ireland, stuff like cranes came under pressure and all that. There's loads of stories about all that. So Christianity has been a bit cruel to pagan traditions and to our beliefs in animals and our folklore and myth and stuff. And they had their own reasons. Of course, Norse tradition, we have, of course, this is Hugin and Munin. And that's Odin, of course, the god of war, the main guy in Norse mythology, and he had two ravens with him. They were called Hugin and Munin, and one of them was thought to be his thought, and the other one was thought to be his memory. And they would be sent around the world to sort of suss things out, and that's why he was such a successful strategic warrior and general and all that sort of stuff. And he had the hop on everyone, because these two birds, these two ravens, were after coming back and telling them exactly what the other armies were planning, where they were going, what they were doing, and he could organise himself and sort that out. And to this day, you still see ravens depicted on, you know, the Viking stuff. They had a great tradition and belief and all that. And Odin also had two wolves, Jerry and Freki, and they were seen as these sort of physical attributes, strong and loyal and honourable and all that sort of stuff. So he was a pretty cool guy, I guess. And then the Fingal County Council emblem, it looks more like a hooded crow, but it's actually meant to be a raven. And that's a throwback to the Battle of Clontarf, where Brian Boru was killed and all that. So when the Vikings raided Dublin, and of course that's sort of they would have had ravens under their shields and their sails and their boats and all that sort of stuff. So that's what that's connected to. And then, of course, the Irish story of Cuchulainn and Morrigan. Morrigan was a woeful yoke altogether. If you don't know this story, she was the woman you did not want to bring home to Mammy. She brought chaos ever. She was a Celtic goddess of war and chaos. And she was an enemy of the two of the Danann and Cuchulainn. And when Maeve marched her army up to Ulster to do the big cattle raid, Cuchulainn was there, of course, to defend Ulster. And the Morrigan tried to woo him a number of times. She turned into a beautiful woman at one point, and Cuchulainn is quoted. He's quoted as saying he had no interest in the female rear end. So I don't know if that meant he was more into the males, or he just had other things on his mind, or whatever. But he basically had no interest in women. So then she started coalescing into different animals. She turned into an eel at one point, and Cuchulainn broke her ribs. At one point she turned into a deer. He broke her leg. All sorts of stuff. So she tried to sort of seduce him in different ways, but he wasn't interested. But every day he was killing hundreds of Maeve's army's soldiers. So what happened was they came to a deal that every day she would present one champion for him to fight every day, and this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. But eventually the sort of wear and tear got the better of him, and he marched back over the other side of the river, and he lashed himself to that rock because he wanted to die standing. But still the army would not go near him because they were afraid he'd lash out and kill a few hundred more of them. So what happened was then Morrigan came in the form of a crow, and she landed on his shoulder, and that's what the big bronze, the famous statue in the post office in Dublin depicts. And that showed then Maeve's army that he was dead for good, and they came then and they sort of chopped him up in bits, and they celebrated their final victory and all that sort of stuff. So that's a huge story, obviously, in our tradition and mythology. Of course, the chieftains then and all that back in pagan Ireland would have looked at the ravens, looked at the signs of nature to work out if the harvest was going to work out, if there was going to be sort of bad weather or floods or war or whatever. So that was fine, and it went on for a long time, and there was a great tradition of that. But then this guy came along, our great patron saint, St. Patrick. Cool dude. We get a great weekend out of him nowadays. But back then he was not a fan of pagan tradition. So he was sort of early Christian. He thought he was doing the right thing, and I suppose he was to him. But that's when sort of they would have started pushing away that kind of ignorance of the pagan tradition and bringing us more into, the Christianity, the teachings of Christianity. So early sort of humans and ravens, there would have been a good relationship, because if you think in a medieval town, there was it was very unsanitary conditions. Literally the bedpan and everything was going out the window into the streets, and the offal in the butchers and all was going into the streets. So the likes of the raven and red kites would have been common in towns in the UK and Ireland, and they would have cleaned up a lot of the offal, so they would have been seen as like helpful animals, if you like. And this went on for many decades and probably centuries, until basically the Tudors came along. And the Tudors were quite sort of, they wanted to be very European and modern and all that sort of stuff. So they would have put a bounty on the heads of those species and got rid of them. They seen them as, it's not very, I don't know, but they didn't want them around the towns and stuff. It wasn't what they were doing in Europe at the time, so they wanted to do it. So there would have been, things, but there's other traditions as well. Little boys of a certain generation in England, you hear loads in the UK, would have kept jackdaws as pets. They would have got them as nestlings in the nest, would have brought them on, reared themselves, and then hand reared them, and had these baby crows as pets. And then as agriculture became more important, we began to trap them. They got they got listed as vermin and pests, and we see crow traps and all that stuff being used. And still you often see over the silage pit in Ireland a hooded crow, or the crows hung over to sort of deter the rooks and all that sort of stuff. In the UK, of course, there's a great myth or belief that if the Tower of London loses its ravens, the crown will fall. So they do put a lot of effort in keeping a flock of ravens in the Tower of London. And one of them guys called Odin, after the Norse god, but there's a raven keeper and all that sort of stuff. And I believe at one point they were trying to sort of look after the crown's purse, and they suggested one of the savings would be to get rid of the raven keeper from the Tower of London, and they were told absolutely under no circumstances was this to happen, or the Queen would fall. Then, of course, farming. Farming did crows a lot of good. So, like back in Ireland, when it was all oak woodlands, there was nothing like the number of rooks that we have today. Many of the crows are animals of open country. So, as soon as we start farming, it suited them quite a lot. Again, in modern, because they're so adaptable, they'll help themselves to a lot of stuff. So, like our sort of throwaway sort of habits and culture suits crows quite well, because some of them will adapt quite well to foraging on whatever they can get. And then in modern opinion, it has changed. So it's not so negative now, in that we understand how things are linked, how things are important. Maybe crows are still a little bit further back than maybe the cuckoos in terms of charisma and popularity, but certainly people now understand that, everything has a role in the ecosystem or whatever. Just checking the time. Oh Christ, I better hurry up here. Okay, so we're going to talk about rooks now. And rooks are the most common species of crow we have. And their annual cycle is this. So in spring, the winter flocks disperse. You see them in huge flocks. We'll get to that in a minute. The flocks disperse in March, and adults pair return to the rookery. So they pair for life, so they're monogamous. So what they'll do is they'll preen their mate. They'll sort of renew the sort of marital, whatever the vows or whatever. They'll sort of repair the bond that maybe has got a bit loose over the winter, and they'll get back into breeding mode, and then they'll nest. And the male will protect a very tiny territory around the nest, because you see they're quite the colonies are quite dense. There could be 50 or 100 nests in one tree, so they will only defend a couple of inches around the nest. So that's all they need. So, but they are still territorial to a point. In the summer, then the family groups continue to forage together. You'll see young crows with the mammy and daddy showing them how it's done and all that sort of stuff. Into sort of the August. Then in the autumn time, the family groups coalesce into sort of bigger roosts groups, and you'll see bigger sort of flocks starting to gather up around the place of feeding sites and roost sites. And then in the winter time, around sort of late October into November, these huge flocks grow into larger winter roosts. And the rookeries sort of disband and they turn into these winter roosts. And you can have thousands of crows. I don't know if you know one locally, but you can have these huge expanses of crows that will all gather at one site for the night. And it's quite sort of loud and raucous and all that. And I'll explain what's going on there in a second. So here's what's going on, right? So in the evening, as it approaches dark, in the morning they get up and disperse off to sort of the fields. They'll split up because if a couple of thousand rooks try to feed in the same field, they won't just find enough food. So they split up into sort of the different groups that they would have been in the rookeries with, off to their little satellite sort of areas. And then as the day goes on, once they get their first feed, they'll roost for the day, because if you're an animal, you don't have the what's the word? The luxury of just knocking around doing nothing, because it's dangerous. You're burning energy, and also you're out there and predators could get you, or the farmer with the shotgun or whatever. So you stay out of the way and you just take it easy. And then in the evening you feed up again before going to roost. So just before dark then they all sort of start coalescing around where the roost site is, and you often see them staging at fields nearby or on the wires in their hundreds before they go back to the group of trees that they're roosting in. And what happens is there's a hierarchy in the roost. So you see it here, it's tiered, if you like. So up the top is the older dominant birds, and they get the best roost sites up the top of the branches. In the middle is younger subordinate birds, and they're in the middle of the layer. And then at the bottom of the pie is the immature, the birds that are just born this year or whatever. And what happens there is all the information is filtering up. So the older birds are getting all the good information about where the food is, where there's danger, whatever, stuff like that. And meanwhile, all the poo is filtering down. So if you're at the bottom of the pecking order, you're given all your information for free, but you're getting all the poo in your head. And it's not a comfortable place to be. And what actually happens is that if it's really bad inclement weather, the older birds will actually make the younger birds go on top to sort of as like crow umbrellas. And I've seen it happening loads of times in that huge roost in Portlaoise. It's really, really amazing. So there is a very clear society, very clear pecking order amongst rooks. And you should keep an eye out now for the end of the summer when you watch them. It's gas, it's like clockwork. And they'll all come in. And what happens is sometimes is a group will come late to the party. All the other birds will have settled down, but there'll be some immature birds in between. And there's no way they're getting some of the top root. So the whole thing will have to erupt again and rearrange itself, and there's murder. And then they'll all settle back down just before dark. It's very interesting to watch. So are crows really that smart? So they say they're as smart as some of the greater apes, a 7-year-old child, and dolphins. So that'll give you a suggestion if you know any intelligent dolphins. So the intelligence, so what is intelligence? So a crow can't say its leaving cert, so we don't know if they'd get 600 pints or whatever. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to make a test. You're trying to create a novel test that they've never seen before to see how clever they are or how quick they can figure it out. So that's generally how scientists test intelligence in animals. There's some very standard tests. There's one called the mirror test. So are crows really that smart? So they say they're as smart as some of the greater apes, a 7-year-old child, and dolphins. So that'll give you a suggestion if you know any intelligent dolphins. So the intelligence, so what is intelligence? So a crow can't say its leaving cert, so we don't know if they'd get 600 pints or whatever. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to make a test. You're trying to create a novel test that they've never seen before to see how clever they are or how quick they can figure it out. So that's generally how scientists test intelligence in animals. There's some very standard tests. There's one called the mirror test, and that what they'll do is they'll paint a colour on like an elephant or a dog or whatever. It won't feel like anything, but then they'll put a mirror in front of them, and then they'll judge whether, like sometimes if the dog starts pawing at the colour, it knows that it's itself. Or otherwise they might not react, or they might just start barking at it like it's another dog. So dogs can't pass the mirror test. Magpies can, most crows can, elephants can, chimpanzees can, but not a lot of other animals can. So that's one of the basic tests. And size matters as well in terms of brain size. So compared to, have I got a slide? Yeah, so look, if we look at this, so if you look at the likes of a human, huge brain compared to our body size, so shows that we've got quite a capacity there. And then you look at the likes of a frog or a crocodile, just a tiny bit of brainstem. They're just like, they're sort of just working on instinct all of the time. They're not really sort of, they're not thinking about things or making strategies or whatever. They're just like hungry, eat, or whatever. Being attacked, run away. It's like, it's all instinctive stuff. It's not cognition. It's not intelligence. Let's say, yeah, with that. So, like, there's an example down there. So, these two birds there at the bottom, you've got a domestic pigeon and a New Caledonian crow. Same body size, but look at the difference in the brain size. So the crow would have a bit more capacity than the pigeon. And even pigeons are considered quite intelligent. And there's a lot of studies on pigeons because during World War I and World War II, they used to use them as carrier pigeons to carry messages and all that. So there was a lot of interest and investment put in studying them at the time. So we do know a lot about the pigeon brain and everything else. One of the really interesting things about birds as well is that they can actually neurogeneration. They can create neurons, new brain cells as they need them. So, for example, early in the spring, canaries and other songbirds and starlings, which are mimics of a lot of, they can grow their brains to keep more bird songs in there to impress the females. So canaries are famous for it. They can literally double their brain size just so they have more tunes in their head to make more whistling sounds to, attract the biggest babe in the village or whatever. So it's really, and they can do that. And then their brains will shrink back as they don't need it. The same with nutcrackers and jays. They can increase their capacity so they can find all their acorns and beech masts and stuff that they've stashed around the place for the winter. So really amazing. So observe behaviour. So I'll get a rest here now because there's a number of videos, which is great. Some things that suggest that they're intelligent. I'll sort of talk you through them once we. So they're adaptable. Adaptable is always great. It's a good suggestion of intelligence that you can adapt readily to whatever's put in front of you. Play is important, and if you have time to play, it means that you have the rest of your life kind of sorted out. You have the mortgage paid, you have the car full of diesel, you have a good job or whatever, you're in good health, so you can play. But same in the bird world. Like, if you have time to play in the bird world, it means that you have no worries in the world. You're not worried about peregrine coming to get you. You're not worried about where your next meal comes from. So it shows that you've kind of got life sorted out a bit. Caching food, so that's like sort of thinking about, okay, I'm going to need this later. So there's an intelligence in that, and then again going and finding it. Learning, and I'll talk about that. Communication as well is really important. So that social part, social animals are often more intelligent than the ones who aren't. And tool use is huge, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. So you might play that first one there, Jim.
Crows have become highly skilled at making a living in these new urban environments. In this Japanese city, they have devised a way of eating a food that normally they can't manage. Dropping a nut from a great height onto a hard road does sometimes crack it, but some nuts are particularly tough. So the crows have devised a better way. Drop it among the traffic. The problem now is collecting the bits without getting run over. So some birds have refined their technique. They station themselves beside pedestrian crossings. Wait for the lights to stop the traffic. Then collect your cracked nut in safety.
So you can see who better say it than David Attenborough. So that's an old video, but so you've seen maybe how the crows drop the mussel shells or whatever, but to have the intelligence to go to a traffic stop and do it that way and have the cars crush it for you, it's something else. So that's really adaptive and obviously a very, very intelligent behaviour. Next one is caching food. It's actually, won't play that one, Jim, it's not very interesting, but basically what the bird is doing is it's expressing a behaviour called theory of mind. Excuse me. And theory of mind is when an animal, again, humans thought they were the only ones that had the theory of mind. It's when you think about what another person might be thinking. So in terms of this crow, it hears another crow in the distance and it's trying to cache its food. It's trying to cache a dog nut. And so what it does is going, oh, it's going to come along now after and try to take my dog nuts. So what it does is it goes around and pretends to cache it in other places and sort of goes off then and puts it behind a flower pot. So that's theory of mind. So that's again, it's not something exhibited in a lot of animals. This one's good. Play this one, Jim. It's short.
В эту сторону. Смотри. Вот.
Чего она?
С горки катается. Она нас, наверное, дразнит.
Балует. Интересно, в какую сторону она сейчас едет?
Тут. Нет. Она вообще не едется что-то вот.
Здрава.
So this is time to go alpine skiing, and that's just a video taken on someone's phone in Russia, but that's quite common. You see on YouTube as well. You'll see them sliding down windscreens of cars and all that. And again, that shows, like I said earlier, if you've got time to play, if you're like he's not worried about anything. He's got a mate. He's got somewhere to roost. He knows where his next meal is coming from, and he's not worried about predators. So he can play, which is a really, really good indication that they know what they're doing. This one's crazy. Excuse me. There was a study, a guy called John Marslow. He writes a lot of stuff. He's in the University of Washington. He's the crow guy. And they did a facial recognition study. And what they did was they went around campus wearing a caveman mask and a Dick Cheney mask. And the crows didn't react at all. They just thought it was more humans on the campus or whatever. And then what they did the next day was they went back with the caveman mask and they cut some of the crows, the American crows. They're rooks, if you like, and ringed them, colour ringed them, so they knew what birds they had caught. The next day, then they repeated the mask thing again, and the birds absolutely sort of attacked and were scalding the caveman mask. So they understood that this was the bad guy. He was the guy that caught us yesterday and put the rings on us and sort of harassed us. And they didn't care about the Dick Cheney mask at all. So they didn't associate Dick Cheney or the mask with harm or whatever. But not only did the crows with the rings react, but all the other crows on campus did as well. So they had communicated, this guy is bad, stay away from him, he's trying to catch you. And not only that, it lasted 6 generations. So 6 whole seasons later after the chicks from the next year knew this guy was bad, this caveman. And it went on and on and on like that. So it lasted 6 seasons before they stopped sort of communicating the fact that this guy was bad. But anyone knows anything about Dick Cheney, he's way more dangerous than any caveman. So the crows maybe weren't that intelligent. They weren't watching the news. This is might just play that and I'll talk over it. So this is what I'm talking about, novel tests. So this is a New Caledonian crow, thought to be the most intelligent of the species. He immediately, so these are just beakers. One has a morsel of food, one has water with a morsel of food floating on top. The other one has sand. But he immediately recognises that he won't be able to move the sand. But if he disrupts the water by putting in rocks, it'll rise to a level where he can grab the food. So it takes him absolutely no time. And that's the first time for that crow to see that test. And the New Caledonian crow as well was the first species that tool use was observed in. They were making twigs and they were putting little fish hooks on them and to fish out beetle grubs out of the bark of trees. So there he goes. He gets his prize. Oh, he hasn't got it yet. There you go. So Watch one more. Same test, except some of the cubes are solid and others are hollow. So you see now what happens here. He's got two heavy ones. He knows they'll sink. Discards the light one. He knows it won't sink. Yeah, so it just goes on and on. So Jim, you can skip ahead. So just like amazing. Now that's in captivity. So how do you couldn't really test that in nature. So it's difficult. This one is just talks about tool use, but there's no need to play it, Jim, actually. But Christian Rutz is describing how they thought that tool use was only in New Caledonian crows, but they realised the entire population of Hawaiian crows, they've gone extinct in Hawaii, and the entire population is actually in San Diego Zoo. So it's a really good opportunity to study an entire population in its entirety. And what one of the zookeepers there realised is that they were also using the Hawaiian crows were also using tools. And some animal behaviourists will actually go as far to say is that if birds and crows they evolved digits like us, they would jump way ahead because we evolved digits. We could make tools, we could make fire, we could made up technology. So we jumped the pack, if you like, in terms of. But some people will say if crows had fingers, they would be just as smart and would have just kind of like societies like us. We'd maybe living along them, or they would be our overlords. So. It's interesting. So just want to show you, I talked about rooks and rookeries, or roosts. Rookeries is where they nest, and the roosts are where they stay. So in that site that I talked about, that I was first introduced in Portlaoise, you'll see in the summertime just around average about 200 nests. So about 400 individual rooks nest there. But in the winter, look how many birds will roost there on the same site in the same trees. So it goes up to 4,000 in 2016, and in the year before just shy of 4,000. So like there can be really, really big spectacles when there's not much else happening in nature in the winter. You know, a starling murmuration and the rookeries, they're sensational. And there's a map of the rookeries. We did it was actually during COVID, so it was kind of caught the zeitgeist, I suppose, at the time, and just put out a Facebook page asking for recordings, a photo of the rookery, its location, and roughly how many nests. So here's the map of Laois with them. So you see the Sleep Blue Mountains is abandoned. It's too high up. It's not suitable foraging. It's all conifer woodland, so they're like the open fields and stuff. So nothing up there. But look at the rookiest part of Laois is this crazy road on the east side. That's the road from Strably to Carlow. So whatever's going on there is an awful lot of crows. So yeah, it's really interesting. And just some suggested reading if you're interested. The Mind of the Raven by Brent Heinrich, brilliant book. He's in the east coast of States. He studies ravens. The Raven, is the Bible from Derek Ratcliffe again, and Burke did the Magpie book. Crow Country with Mark Cocker it's a nice read. It's more of a novel than it's his experience of the crows rather than a scientific thing. So loads and loads of books out there about things. So just a mention to our podcast. Me and Niall did our live podcast here yesterday. So if you're into nature and wildlife and all that, I think you'll enjoy the podcast. So do check it out. And thanks very much.
Hello. Ricky, that was just amazing.
Thanks,
and
mate.
I think people are voting with their feet here today. Look, apologise to anybody at the back or at the very back who couldn't make it in, but we're just limited by our space. So look, appreciate you sticking around, and I know it was raining for part of that. We're going to have a very quick Q&A here. Sam Bailey has kindly agreed to stay on and just chat to Ricky very briefly, just a little bit about what we've just seen.
That was awesome, Ricky. I know you've given this talk a few times before, but I've missed it every time, so it was great to finally see it, even if it was from the back. Amazing. I mean, I have a real keenness on rooks and crows myself, and coming from England, I was always amazed at the rooks here, because the rooks in Ireland are nothing like anywhere else in Europe. It's something quite amazing that you'll find them walking around the streets. Coming from England, they're very scarce, hiding away in the countryside. You won't get anywhere near them. Do you have any idea how that might have developed in Ireland and nowhere else?
No, I have no idea. I mean, it goes back to the open countryside, I don't know if it's the level of leather jackets or whatever it is, or maybe it's just different farming practices. I mean, there is more woodland in the UK. There's maybe more species they possibly compete with. I don't know. It's I haven't a clue, Sam. Thanks for asking that.
I like to keep it simple.
But I will say, some of the biggest rookeries known in the world are in the UK. Like, I mean, I think Mark Cocker reports one he used to visit as a child in summer in Suffolk, I think, 40,000 birds. Like, that's crazy. That goes back to those sort of those Edwardian things would go vast numbers, the sky going dark basically when they land. So yeah, and you've got that tradition in the UK of these copse of trees on in isolated farms. So like the likes of the fens and all be ideal for just go out into the ploughed fields and come back. So it's ideal in a way. I'm surprised there's not more in the UK really. I don't know, maybe if they're controlled more in the UK traditionally, could be something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be a more history of control. I mean, I don't know. It's a fascinating way of looking at them. I mean, they literally will. They won't come to gardens. They won't come even in really rural areas. They're just scared of people, which is very different here, as most people will realise.
Yeah.
Has anyone else got a question they might want to ask Ricky?
I was wondering about Corvid predators. I mean, what eats ravens?
What eats ravens? Well, yeah. I mean, if a peregrine, if it got lucky, but they wouldn't tend to tackle them. They're quite robust animals. I mean, another raven might have a go, and they won't waste a meal. But I don't think, like, in terms of predators, they're too worried. I mean, I know buzzards will take magpies quite readily, and they'll surprise jackdaws and maybe the occasional rook. They do, and I've seen it. I have seen it, but especially magpies. Magpies maybe get a little bit mean and inquisitive, and they'll land below a tree where a buzzard will be perched, and literally on its sheer weight, it'll just collapse on top of it and just crush it and kill it. That definitely happens. So, but in terms of ravens, I don't know if anything touches it. Yeah. You're kind of picking the biggest guy in the yard there before, you might start a bit smaller. Yeah.
Anyone else? One more question for anyone? Oh,
yeah, great.
Hi, thanks for that. That was fantastic. I'm just wondering there with leather jackets. You'd seen freshly cut lawns. All the crows would be.
Yeah.
So it's leather jackets they're rooting for.
Well, a lot, yeah, they do. No, they eat an awful lot of invertebrates, but the leather jackets are a specialty of theirs because they're a worthwhile meal. They're quite big. And juicy and all that, and actually their beak is modified. If you see the adult birds, the beak goes. You get this grey patch on their face almost, and that's an extension of their bill. It kind of wears off. They don't get that until their second year, and it's the feathers wear off, and it's actually an extension of their bill. And what you'll also see as well, because they make such a big cavity in the ground when they do that, is the starlings will often join them, and the starlings will then hop into the same hole that they've created for the smaller invertebrates that the rooks aren't interested in, and they'll get the smaller guys. So there's a bit of, I suppose, cooperation there as well, or piggybacking there. So yeah, they're an important animal. Go ahead.
Just one other question there. Is it true that they can detect if there's bad weather coming? The birds start to, if there's a storm coming or whatever, you see the birds and they're all kind of gathering on the wires and. Yeah,
absolutely. I don't think anyone's ever proved it, but it certainly seems to be the case that they will behave differently. They will go to ground and they'll go to roost early or whatever if the weather's coming. Certainly, yeah. But again, I've never seen any science to prove it or to disprove it. Yeah. Paloma?
Okay, one last question. Sorry, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks, Ricky. I know you said you did this rookery census during COVID. Since then, have you noticed a decline in your area? Because, as you know, we're doing a project on rook, and we do find that, firstly, this year they were very late, even starting to nest, but also it seems like the numbers have actually been going down.
Yeah, I haven't. I only watch my own sort of local ones. I haven't got sort of do the whole county. I couldn't tell you really. excuse me, no, we'll have to try do the whole thing. But I tell you what I did find a fall off in is interest. I kind of tried to provoke the survey 2 years later, but there's less interest. People are just back to their normal lives now. Like during COVID, it was just thrown, you know, people were suggesting ideas and, oh, let's do it in all the counties and all this. And now I can barely get a record at all. So it's very interesting how, you know, that the COVID really did capture people and people had more time to do these sort of things. So no, I'll have to try jizz everyone up and see. But you're right, I'll keep more of a close eye now and see. But it's interesting that you're finding that. And any difference in the amount of clutch size or anything like that? No. Okay. Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Ricky, thanks a million.
Cheers, everyone.
We have you talked out.